Hi, I'm Gail Street. In 2006, Paths to the Present presented a series of episodes about Montgomery County's Great Road. That's Route 355 to us today. A lot of history happened along that major artery, and we want to rerun that series for you. Because the series is a few years old, some of the people interviewed have moved on to other positions. Also, in a few cases, the structures presented have been altered. But regardless, this series of shows gives you a sense of just how much history happened up and down this corridor. So, without further ado, let's follow again the Great Road. It's got different names depending on where you are. Wisconsin Avenue, Rockville Pike, Hungerford Drive, Frederick Road. We're talking about Route 355. Everyone knows it as a highly congested artery that frustrates most drivers and frightens many pedestrians. It's the most heavily traveled road in this county, and because of that, many go to great lengths to avoid it. From the very beginning, the road has been a landmark in Montgomery County. It got its start as a Native American trail, crisscrossing streams through woods and open spaces. Later, it came to be called the Great Road by the farmers who sent goods down to the port of Georgetown. Today, a drive up 355 reveals the extremes of urban, suburban, and rural landscapes. So sit back as Paths to the Present spends a year traveling the Great Road. Connecting the cities of Georgetown and Frederick is one of the main reasons this road developed as it did. In earlier times, Georgetown was a bustling port city and Frederick was the capital of a region that included Montgomery, Frederick, and Washington counties, as well as the District of Columbia. It was necessary to move goods from the capital and points in between to the port for export. And that's where our journey begins, Georgetown. Standing at the base of Wisconsin Avenue in Georgetown, it's hard to imagine that in the 1700s, this waterfront was once one of the largest ports in the colonies. This is what it looked like in 1795. But really, the story begins a half-century before that. To learn more, we visited the Georgetown branch of the D.C. Public Library. Inside is the Peabody Room, which houses a special collection documenting Georgetown history. Jerry McCoy is the librarian.
We can credit the establishment of Georgetown to tobacco. In 1745, a Scottish immigrant named Gordon Bell established a tobacco warehouse in the general area southwest of the present-day intersection of Wisconsin Avenue and M Street. And his name was Gordon Bell, and he established a tobacco port here because this was as far that you could sail up the Potomac River before the water became too shallow. And it was just a natural location to have a port for shipping purposes. Buildings started being erected around Gordon Bell's tobacco warehouses, and within 6 years, by 1751, the state of Maryland established the town of George as a real community, and that's the credited date for the establishment of Georgetown, 1751.
Back then, Georgetown was a part of the state of Maryland. It was only a few square blocks that were centered along the waterfront.
Where people park their automobiles today, right at the foot of Wisconsin Avenue, that was where the story of Georgetown began. K Street was known as Water Street because it was the closest street that paralleled the Potomac River. And today's Wisconsin Avenue, which was then known as High Street. So that was where the majority of the activity was centered right around that location. And then it, of course, stretched up and down the banks of the Potomac from that intersection. And you had different warehouses, different wharves that stuck out into the Potomac River.
Stagecoaches and wagons traveled to and from the port city. Many farmers sent their tobacco down to Georgetown in large hogsheads or round casks, which were rolled along the Great Road or dragged by animals.
It was a very dirty, gritty Wisconsin Avenue, kind of hard to imagine. But it was a very rough cut, just a narrow dirt road that cut up and over the hill here where the library is located, called Georgetown Heights. And it was just mostly a route for people to travel from the town of George to Frederick, Maryland, which was the county seat of Frederick County.
Georgetown ceased being a part of Maryland in 1791 when a 10-mile square area was designated by Congress to be the new nation's capital. Souter's Tavern, located on Wisconsin Avenue near the waterfront, played an important part in the district's history. It's believed that George Washington met here with Pierre L'Enfant to map out the sale of lots for the newly established city.
Even though it was part of the District of Columbia as of 1791, Georgetown still had its own mayor and town council up until 1871, when it then became formally part of the District of Columbia government. And at that time, all of the original early street names of Georgetown, High Street, today's Wisconsin Avenue, K Street, which was then originally Water Street, had to conform to the current grid of the city of Washington. And those two different names of all the different streets were interchangeable for a quarter of a century, until practically all of the old Georgetowners died off, and then people just started using the current names that the streets are known for.
Over time, Georgetown grew and developed. Port activity dropped off when tobacco production declined in 1800. Shipping continued for a few more decades until silt filled the channel, preventing large ships from reaching the wharves. Later that century, another transport route to Georgetown was created, the C&O Canal. We see it here passing under Wisconsin Avenue near M Street. This reservoir began serving the community of Georgetown in the 1850s. Designed by Montgomery Meigs, it was located on the site of the present-day Georgetown Library. In 1890, streetcars began running up and down Wisconsin Avenue to Tenleytown and beyond. Streetcar service continued in Washington, D.C. until 1963. Georgetown, as a port city, is now only a memory, but the once dirt path that accessed it lives on as today's Wisconsin Avenue. When we return, we'll follow that road into Montgomery County. Stay tuned.
From the fertile farms of the Agricultural Reserve to our historic neighborhoods and brand new suburbs. From the mixed-use centers of city and town to our halls of government, up county and down. County Cable Montgomery covers it all.
Driving is serious business. When you're talking or texting on a cell phone, your reaction time can be impaired. That's why Maryland passed a law that bans the use of handheld cell phones while driving. If you choose to ignore the law, the results can be perilous.
From 1748 until 1791, all the land from Georgetown and north was a part of Montgomery County. Back then, the Great Road passed through forests and farmland. Early travelers spent days making the trip northward. After leaving Georgetown, the first stop was Tenleytown, where the Great Road met River Road. It was at this busy spot that John Tenley operated a tavern for many years. His ordinary, as they were called at the time, served meals, dispersed spirits, and acted as a community meeting place. With the tavern as a landmark, the surrounding neighborhood came to be called Tenleytown, At some point, it was altered to Tinleytown. By then, the Great Road had become heavily traveled. Wagons regularly carried produce to market in Georgetown and brought fish, ground flour, and imported goods back north. The next stop along the way is the first one in modern Montgomery County. This is Friendship Heights, known today for its metro stop on the Red Line and for its swanky shops and high-priced homes and condos. When we look back, it's clear that through the years, this neighborhood has seen a lot of changes. This is Wisconsin Avenue at Friendship Heights today. With the metro stop, office buildings, and stores most often found on Rodeo Drive, it draws people from all over. It's also home to close to 5,000 residents, most of whom live within a 32-acre triangle of high-rise apartments and condominiums. It's hard to believe that only a century ago, this was countryside, with 2 farms and a blacksmith shop. Lillian Shoemaker Brown, descendant of an early settler here, had these memories of her childhood.
My sister, brother, and I were born there and enjoyed the freedom of the country life, always interested in the many activities on the farm. We loved wading in the streams, but most of all, my brother and I tried to outdo one another, climbing to the highest branches in the trees. What exhilaration to be so high and see so much. Cornfields, pastures, and nearby windmills.
Over time, the land was divided and homes were added. By 1950, the population had grown to 500. The Shoemaker farm was the last to be sold. In 1951, Woodward and Lothrop bought it for the first suburban store in Montgomery County. Sylvia Rothstein lived in Chevy Chase, D.C. at the time. She describes what there was at Friendship Heights.
Not very much. We lived 2.5 miles away from Friendship Heights, and at that time there was a Howard Johnson on the corner of Wisconsin and Western, and college kids used to go there, and there was also Woody's, and really not very much else. It was a neighborhood area. It was really a village, and there was what they call Western Circle, and there was a Giant there and a paper goods store and a cleaner and tweeds and things. And when my girls, who are now 50, were ready for college, we did a lot of their shopping there for the twin sweaters that everybody had to have in that era.
This photo was taken in 1976, after many of the high-rise buildings had been constructed. Friendship Heights' transformation had begun in 1965 when the first apartment house was erected. At the time, a drive northward on Wisconsin Avenue was very different than today.
When we moved here, we didn't call it Wisconsin Avenue. We said we were going up the pike if we went past Western Avenue. Bethesda was nothing in those days. It was farmland, and you went for a ride, and there was some country inns for way, in Rockville and that area, and you'd go there for lunch or dinner, for a Sunday ride.
A lasting impact on Friendship Heights came when Metro's Red Line opened in 1984.
When we moved here, they were digging the Metro, and it was very noisy. They did away with the Howard Johnsons, and they started digging the Metro, and that changed the area completely. People could come from all over much more easily. Before that, there was a bus on Wisconsin Avenue that ended at the district line, and there was a bus that went on Military Road. But other than that, there was no public transportation.
Friendship Heights today is more than just a metro stop. Look beyond the stores and you'll find an active and vibrant community. Its anchor is this beautiful center that was built to serve the neighborhood. Officially dedicated in 1986, it's a place to gather, both formally and informally. Nestled among these high rises, it helps to make Friendship Heights feel like home. Our journey northward along Route 355 continues. Last time we left off in the village of Friendship Heights, and today we're moving on to Bethesda. Of course, there's a lot to cover in that town, but en route there are a few places worth a note. This is Norwood Park. Today it's a place for recreation, but from 1897 to 1935, it was a 50-acre USDA experimental farm. The building behind me is all that remains from that era. One notable discovery made here was the identification of the disease Salmonella. Dr. Daniel Salmon is credited with this finding. He also helped establish the nearby town of Somerset. Somerset has been incorporated since 1906. Despite the surrounding growth, its early character has been preserved. In 1890, a group of USDA scientists purchased the land for a new suburban neighborhood. Soon, Victorian-era homes were built on 1-acre lots. Many say downtown Bethesda is experiencing a golden age. It's become a vibrant destination point for people of all ages. The Central Business District boasts of 200 restaurants, and with the availability of live theater, galleries, movies, and unique stores, this town is always hopping with activity. You might say, however, that Bethesda has been lucky enough to have had 2 golden ages, because just after the Second World War, this was the place to be. In the late 40s, early 50s, you could buy almost anything at all in Bethesda. Businesses which had begun springing up along the streetcar line in the 1920s expanded and prospered in the post-war boom. There were clothing stores, hardware stores, places to buy food, and 2 movie theaters. Bob Eastham was a teenager in the 50s. He now owns Eastham's Exxon, the oldest business still operating in Bethesda. He took it over from his father in 1966 after working there for 10 years.
I remember not too long ago, it seems like, when I was a young Bethesdian, you know, and go to the movies on Saturday, and Mr. Heiser would be at the Heiser Theater, and it was like one big happy family. I mean, by happy family, I mean everyone helped each other. We all knew each other because it wasn't that many people here then, and there weren't that many businesses here, so we all knew each other, and if anyone needed help, we were all there to help. It was like that, small town.
But even before the streetcars and the stores, there were people living in Bethesda. That's because of its position on the Great Road. Bill Offit, historian and author of Bethesda, A Social History, explains.
Well, it was a crossroads from the time of the Civil War, and a place where people went to stores and markets and blacksmith shops and that sort of thing. Number of farms around here, some pretty good size, some dairy operations, but mostly corn and wheat by the time of the Civil War.
Nowadays, Bethesda's history can be seen in the buildings that have been preserved and in the old photographs that have been saved. Here at Leland Street is the oldest row of stores in Montgomery County. It dates to the 1920s. 10 years later, another set of stores was built directly across Wisconsin Avenue. This is what it looks like today. The stone came from the nearby Stonyhurst Quarry and was a popular building material at the time. On the next block is Eastham's Exxon. Today it's a place where drivers can select old-fashioned full service, hearkening back to the days when no one pumped their own gas. The garage looked like this when it first opened in 1929. It's changed a lot since then.
We have evolved from a 65 by 90 piece of property to the whole block now, and this is our 3rd building. My father built the first one in 1929. It was what they call a Baltimore style with a canopy that came out, 4 gas pumps, and I think we have 32 now. And then in 1952, he remodeled that and built what they call a white porcelain Art Deco type of a facility, which we had for 30 years until '83 when I built this.
Moving on, we come to the Bethesda Farm Women's Market. This market began in 1932 as a Great Depression self-help project by Upper County farm families. Operated totally by women, this unique undertaking brought farm goods to down county residents. And despite a few changes in operation, the market still continues today. Bethesda's oldest commercial building is located near Elm Street. Constructed in 1890, this was originally the community's general store and post office. Later it became Community Paint and Hardware, a popular establishment among Bethesda residents for decades. The Air Rights building sits on a former B&O railroad right-of-way. It is so named because the developer could not purchase the land. Instead, rights to develop the air above the tracks were purchased in the 1960s. And old construction photos shows the tracks running underneath the building. Today, it's the Georgetown branch of the Capitol Crescent Trail. 1 block north is a 3-story brick building dating to 1929. It's known as Dr. Perry's office because for years he practiced medicine from the first-floor office. Later it housed Brooks Photographers, a longtime Bethesda business and creator of many of this show's photographs. On the next block is Bethesda's post office. This building is one of 3 county post offices built under the WPA project in the 30s. This one was erected in 1937 and also was made of Stonyhurst stone. Inside is a WPA commissioned mural depicting rural Montgomery County. Its painter, Robert Gates, became one of Washington's most respected and influential artists. Another piece of artwork found at this spot is the Madonna of the Trail. This sculpture was installed on the southern side of the post office in 1929 to commemorate this country's frontier women. It is one of 12 identical statues across the United States, marking the route taken by settlers to the west. During metro construction, the statue was endangered. For years, it remained in storage, but was recently re-erected on the northern side of the Bethesda post office, allowing everyone to be able to enjoy it again.
Laura says we should start worrying about drinking at these things.
You're only 12.
I know. I'm just glad you know better, sweetheart.
You're too smart for that, right, honey?
Real kids are curious about alcohol. 40% tried by the 8th grade. Talk early, talk often, get others involved.
When you think of our national forests, you think of the wonders of nature, wood for our homes, or scenic beauty. You may not think of the water you drink, but our forests help replenish our rivers and streams during dry times and keep our lakes and reservoirs clean. But those forests are being devastated by disease and fire. The Arbor Day Foundation asks for your help in replanting our national forests. Visit arborday.org. See how together we can plant our future.
I'm standing in front of Bethesda's Metro Center, right near the intersection of Wisconsin and East-West Highway. Before Metro, this block housed another shopping strip dating to the 20s. On the southern end stood one of 2 movie theaters in town. Known at first as the State and later Heiser's, it regularly drew excited crowds for the latest movies. Bill Offutt recalls passing many a Saturday afternoon at the Heiser. However, it's what happened behind it that really sticks in his mind. On June 30th, 1945, 2 Navy fighter pilots were hot-dogging it in the skies above Bethesda. Then suddenly, one accidentally cut the tail off the other.
And the plane that lost its tail turned upside down, and the pilot fell out. His parachute streaming down, and a big old plane turned around and came right back at the middle of Bethesda with its huge engine, 2,000 horsepower Pratt & Whitney. Plane weighed about 8,000 pounds. And it was coming at us on a nice Saturday afternoon with the theaters full of kids and the stores full of women using up their ration coupons. It roared over the firehouse, crossed Edgemore Lane, and smashed into the only empty lot in the middle of town. It made a heck of a hole and a big explosion as its fuel went off, blew itself to pieces, and nobody was hurt. Nothing was broken. The only thing it had done was kill some weeds.
This is Old Georgetown Road, where it splits off from Wisconsin Avenue. Originally, that was the Great Road, but in 1825, a new one was built over here. Back then, this was a toll road with stops along the way from Georgetown to Rockville. The building behind me was built in 1926. Then it was the Bank of Bethesda. Established in 1919, this bank lent money for Bethesda's early construction projects. Prominent developer Walter Tuckerman was its first president. Up until the 1950s, this building was the tallest in Bethesda. Across the street stood the very popular Hot Shops. Even though it closed in 1994 and the building was torn down 5 years later, its memories still bring smiles to longtime residents. Dave Dabney graduated from Walter Johnson High School in 1964. Today, he's executive director of Bethesda Urban Partnership.
Well, some of my best memories on Wisconsin Avenue was the Hot Shops at the corner of East-West Highway and Wisconsin Avenue. It was the curb service food that was there, the Mighty Mo, the onion rings, the Coke, the orange freeze, Teen Twist, all of the things that were leading everybody into what is now Burger King and McDonald's. But that was where we went. It was as much American Graffiti from the movie as you would ever find.
Pre-Civil War maps show that Bethesda was once known as Old Stone Tavern. That's because here on the site of Pumphrey's funeral home was a stagecoach stopover with the same name. Moving north, we come to the Bethesda Theater. Built in 1938, it was originally known as the Borough. This Art Deco-style movie house was a fixture in Bethesda until it closed in 2001 for redevelopment. Artie Harris of the Bizzuto Development Group says the theater will live again.
In 2007, we'll open the theater. It'll be operated by the Nederlander Group. It's a worldwide operator of theaters around the country, and will be open as a live performing arts theater. And if you go inside, it's just an absolutely gorgeous theater. It's got lovely murals that were restored. It's got sculpted walls and ceilings, something that was not built today. So you just have to preserve that.
The last stop on our tour today is the Little Tavern. The Little Tavern franchises began springing up in 1927. Their distinctive small shops with steep roofs became fixtures in the metro area, where, at one time, there were over 50 little taverns. While no longer serving hamburgers, this one in Bethesda is the best preserved of the 4 that remain in Montgomery County. Bethesda's vibrancy began to wane in the late 1960s when shopping malls drew residents away from town centers. But the opening of the Metro in 1984 breathed new life into Bethesda, something that is still continuing today. Well, that's all the time we have for this show. I'm Gail Street. I'll see you next time.